Hi and welcome to Brussels for Talking Europe with today's debate on the EU's migration and asylum policies. Major changes are in the making with a toughening of rules, more checks on who enters the EU and a new process to facilitate returns. Our guests today are Juan Fernando López Aguilar, former Justice Minister of Spain, member of the group of the Socialists and Democrats, and Christopher Storm from Denmark, member of the European Parliament, also standing with the right-wing ECR group. Welcome to the two of you.
Thank you.
My first question is for you, Mr. Storm. You're relatively new to European politics. You became MEP in 2024. When you joined Parliament, did you have a sense of duty that new immigration rules needed to be implemented? Did you feel that your Danish compatriots were expecting just that?
Yes, and they did, because it's actually one of the key topics for my party, and I think most of the Danes understands the needs of a stronger migration policy in not only in Denmark but in the whole of Europe, because what we can see in many European countries is that the culture is under pressure from this mass migration we have seen for the last...
What do you mean your culture is under pressure?
We can see that things that when I grew up as a kid was normal in school is no longer normal. Like going to church at Christmas together with the school, that having sports together, female and male, boys and girls. And today, some places, mostly there's a lot in cities with a lot of migrants, they try to divide boys and girls. They tries to get rid of the old traditions. They wants to take out the pork meat from the canteens, from the school and the kindergartens and so on.
Are you shocked to hear these kinds of words about culture being threatened? Possibly the Western civilization, I think that's what you mean, under threat. Do you think also that migration policies need to change radically in Europe?
Yeah, short answer is no. Certainly the EU needs rules. It's needed rules for much too long. And that is why precisely we fought so hard for 10 years in a row, for 2 mandates of the European Parliament, to put in place the actual implementation of a mandate of the Treaty of Lisbon. There should be a common European migration system and a common European asylum system based on rules. The only thing is that those rules are to be implemented. And the deadline for them to be implemented, those 8 regulations in a row, which are the component elements of the Migration and Asylum Pact that we negotiated so hard, are to finally be given the chance to enter into force, actual force, July this year, because it was adopted 1.5 years ago, and it was 2 years for the member states to raise their implementation plans to the Commission, and for the Commission to make sure that the member states are fully ready to comply with their obligations according to EU law. But it takes EU law for sure, because migration certainly is divisive. Asylum certainly is divisive. I'm well aware of it. And of course, I do not go along with that negative rhetoric and that negative approach to the migration fact.
Is it a negative approach?
No, it's not a negative approach, it's the fact. It's not something...
Precisely, it's a fact.
Yeah.
It's not a threat. It's not a crisis. Migration has always been there, has always existed. But it takes a European scale of response. The member states have not disappeared, but it takes a common European response to make sense.
But so there's a big difference between the migration. You said it has always existed. Yes, it's true. People have migrated from neighbor countries to neighbor countries. But what we have been seeing for the last 20 years is that people are migrating from Africa and the Middle East to Europe with a totally different culture that we have here in Europe. And that put our culture under pressure, under a totally different pressure than we used to when we talk about migration. And that's the reason that we have so many problems with migration and with migration seekers in Europe today. It's because they came to Europe with a totally different approach to how to live your life, a totally different culture, a totally different religion than we used to have here in Europe. And that makes a lot of clashes. It's not just something I said. You can see it everywhere. You can see it in Spain, you can see it in Denmark, you can see it here in Brussels. We have problems between the original people in the country and the migrants everywhere in Europe. And we have very different migration politics. In Spain, you have a very socialist government and a socialist approach to migration policies and to But in Denmark, for example, we have a totally different migration policies. And we have been having that for years now, even with the Social Democrats as a prime minister. But we still have the same kind of problems with migrants from the Middle East.
So, well, actually, first of all, it's not true that now we're seeing a completely new situation. Migration has always existed through continents. There has always been movement of people through continents. Only the more so in globalization, which is the final stage of mankind. But precisely because we're living in the globalization, there is nothing you can prevent from moving people who are under tyranny, oppression, drought, lack of resources, or warfare from certain regions of the world to another regions, because there is a revolution of transports, of communications. But the thing is that precisely because we also, Europeans, have to go global, and we have to stick faithful to our values, and most importantly, to our legislated law, to EU law, it takes a European scale of response. You're making the point. There are many differences between member states because for much too long we have been subject to a negative dynamic of action, reaction, even panicking and hysteria whenever a certain country has been much under pressure in an external border of the European Union. Take the case of Spain. I'm a Canarian. In the Canarian, we receive 47,000 by boat on a year basis, precisely because that is a fact. It takes a European scale of response. It takes
and there is a European response. We are heading for a new migration and asylum pact, but it does seem that Mr. Storm's and his allies' views are winning over because there is a very strict toughening of rules. Is it a victory for you?
Of course, you can call it a victory because now people of Europe can see what I have been said for years is the truth and is the way to protect Europe. But it's not a victory in the case of this, when we see what had happened to Europe. I would have wished that we have been doing this 20 years ago, so we didn't have to do what we do now. But I really need to put on a comment on what you said before, that people have migrated from different places in the world to other continents before. It's not true. We have never seen a migration that large as we see today between continents. Never before as we have today. Never. The only time that we have seen a mass migration from one continent to another continent before was when the Europeans migrated to America. And see what happens to the Americans over there.
Even to Africa. To Africa and to Asia.
But just look at America. I think that the narrative Americans, I don't believe that if you go back 400 years ago and they saw the Europeans coming to Europe.
Let's take just 1 minute.
A footnote. The thing is that we are 27 member states. We are 450 million citizens. One of the richest and most welfare areas in the world. Are you seriously saying that we should panic because some, let's say, some 500,000 migrants a year knock on our doors? We shouldn't panic. We can handle it as long as we go together, as long as we share the responsibility, as long as there are solidarity tools, and as long as we are bound by law.
Let's talk about one concrete measure, or one of the big changes in the making with these return hubs outside the EU. In December, there was an agreement for EU member states to be able to strike bilateral agreements with countries outside of the EU. We're talking Albania, maybe Rwanda or Uganda. What do you think of this situation? I'm going to get your views, but first I'd like to hear from a French NGO, La CIMAD, talking about these detention centres outside the EU. Take a listen.
We don't know how long people could be detained in these administrative detention centres abroad. We don't know the conditions under which they will be held. We know very well that conditions in detention centres in France and Europe are deteriorating, and there would be even less oversight because these centres will be located in non-EU countries that often don't have the same standards in terms of fundamental rights.
Your views on what we've just heard?
Of course, I do agree. Of course, we socialists, we are against those detention hubs, and we have stated it clearly. For one thing, it begins externalizing our responsibilities and our duties. Second, it's not clear how do you get a third country to set up a detention center so that they keep migrants aiming to Europe out of our sight. Certainly because you pay them, maybe because you bribe their governments. Is that a legitimate tool? Is that a right way forward? And then, of course, there is no reassurance that fundamental rights, human rights, and international law is to be respected by paying someone to keep people out of our sight.
But it's our responsibility to make sure that the rights, that they live up to the human rights on this census. And I believe
so these return hubs are a good idea for you.
And I believe that the European Union is capable to make good agreements with these countries that, of course, they will live up to the human rights. So it doesn't concern me at all. But I think it's a very great idea because, first of all, it makes it more safe for the migrants. So they don't have to go all the way through the desert of Morocco, for example, to come to the Mediterranean and take this very dangerous journey over the sea. Every second hour, one person dies in the Mediterranean for the last 10 years. Every second hour, a person dies because of the migration policy that you support. I don't want us to continue that in Europe. I think it should be much more humane to say, no, let's stop it now. Let's keep people alive and have the migration hubs in Africa.
There is a point I would like to be clear. First, as to people dying in the attempt of setting foot on our shores, of course, it takes a lot of coordination in search and rescue operations at the European scale, and that is also a consistent demand of this European Parliament. But second, it is absolutely obvious that if people are willing to risk their lives, it's because they have no alternative way to make it to Europe, and they are willing to die in the attempt. That is a strong message. So it takes legal pathways, so they're having an opportunity not to abandon themselves into organized crime. And the third point is that, just to make it clear, the retention centers are not for people on the move, not to make an entry into Europe. No, it's once they make it into Europe, you transfer to a retention center by paying someone abroad so that you keep them out of our sight. Is that a tool? I don't think so.
Juan Fernando Lopez Aguilar and Christopher Storm, thank you very much for taking part in this debate. It's all we have time for. Thank you all for watching Talking Europe from Brussels. Stay tuned to France 24 for more international news and reports, of course.